Welcome to National Ballet Measures. Uh, so, it's a typo. It's supposed to say National Ballot Measures, you know? But I decided to just run with it. You gotta have a sense of humor, right? So, we're just gonna leave that title up there, National Ballet Measures. Yeah? So, anyway, now that the audience has had a good row, they help join in. So yeah, today we're going to talk about if we implemented national ballot measures in the U.S., what would that look like? This is a proposal of mine that I have. Now, I want to make a couple of things clear. First of all, I am not a content creator. This is going to be unedited, like the last video I did. This is a one-off. I really would like content creators who have large audiences to redo this video and the other one I did about MAGA modern anthropology in their own voice, their own script, but pretty much the same content. So I'm just basically providing source material for content creators, and if anybody wanders onto this somehow, because I have 15 viewers on my channel, yeah, well, that's good too. So that's one. This is a one-off video that I'm hoping during the holidays and the content creators are taking a break. Maybe I get some views, and maybe some content creator will see this. So that's one. The other thing is that my primary focus is on Irene Society. Irene Society is a replacement for democracy and governments in the world. That's my primary focus. However, big however, I need existing governments to last at least 100 years. Replacing our government is going to take 100, or any government, it's going to take a while. It's not something you can do overnight. It's not a revolution, it's a rebuilding. That doesn't happen overnight. And so we need some stopgap. Up until now, I was just, wasn't worried that our government was going to collapse in the next 100 years. Now I'm kind of worried. So I've had a couple of ideas. This is one of them, to kind of slow down the ultimate collapse. This is not going to prevent the collapse, but hopefully this will slow it down enough so that when our empire does fail completely, Irene will have been established and strong enough to, make way. So, because right now Irene doesn't exist at all. So, welcome to National Ballet Measures. I'm Mybrid Wonderful. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I wrote the National Referendum Act of the United States, and we're just going to go through it each section at a time, and I'm just going to give a overview so that, plant some seeds in your mind. Well, if we were to implement a national ballot measure, what would it look like? Yeah? So without further ado, let me bring up the text. Yeah, so this is available on the Irene website, yeah, which is just irene.social. I'll provide a link below. Why don't I go ahead and make my camera smaller and in a corner so we can read this together, yeah? Zoom. I'll be over here. Maybe that's a little too small. Maybe I'll go just a little larger. Yeah. How's that? Is that better? Yeah. All right. Now we can read the text together. Yeah. All right. So this is on the Irene website. You can just see. Well, I guess you can't because this is a window thing, but it's just irene.social. I'll put a link below. So it's on the main menu of the website, so if you want to get to it, there you go. So this is the National Referendum Act of the United States, yeah, for national ballet measures. So first off is the annual federal government dissolution amendment. All federal elected officials and Supreme Court justices are immediately fired the year of adoption, with all federal benefits stripped and fired people permanently banned from holding federal office or judgeship. Election for federal office is to be held within 30 days. Okay, so this is an annual amendment that is to be voted on every year. Unlike the amendments we have now, which are voted on once and adopted, this one is voted on every year. So every year we're going to have a vote to say, are we going to dissolve the government or not as a body? So that's one of the things we're going to do with national ballot measures. Yeah. Okay, so I've got two sections here, immediate resolutions and permanent resolutions. So the immediate resolution is that when this National Referendum Act passes itself, then the annual federal government dissolution amendment is adopted. So once this act is adopted, everybody's fired. We're going to fire all the representatives that are in there now, and we're going to fire all the judges, right? So that's the immediate resolution. The next one is the Republican and Democratic parties are permanently banned. Yeah, they're just not doing their job. We just need to start over with them. Okay, so those are the immediate resolutions. Now let's get to the permanent resolutions. Okay, constitutional amendment. This act and citizen amendments are an extra constitutional amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Okay, so what is a extra constitutional amendment? It is not law. It is guidance, right? Basically, it's guidance to tell our representatives, we want you to do this, or we're going to fire your ass, right? It's an extra constitutional amendment because it's going to represent a new check on federal power by the states. So the states are going to be responsible for enforcing this, right? So each state is going to fire its federal and representatives and justices. Okay, that's what this is all about. This is state power versus federal power. And if the states are going to say, look, our citizens have voted to fire all the federal officials and Supreme Court justices, and we're going to enforce that. Now, how the states enforce that is on them. They can certainly pressure people to leave office through legal means. Let's just leave it at that. So the states are on the hook for enforcing that the federal officials step down. Yeah? And the country should probably have a conversation as to what that would look like. Yeah? So, but that's what extra constitutional amendment means. Number one is it's providing, these extra constitutional amendments are providing guidance for the federal government. They are not laws. They're just guidance. And number two, if they don't, enact the guidance that is given to them, then the states, and then the enforcement is done by the annual federal government dissolution amendment. So if they don't do what we want every year, we're going to vote to dissolve them. And then if we dissolve them, the states are going to have a new power, a new check to remove the federally elected officials and the Supreme Court justices from office. They can no longer do their job, right? So that's the first thing. It's extra constitutional. And the reason you want it to be extra constitutional is you can't have the hens guarding the hen house, right? I mean, they have shown they're completely irresponsible. They're breaking laws all over the place, but we have no recourse. We have no standing, right? We have no way of suing them and say, hey, you guys are not following the Constitution, right? So passing an actual federal amendment for them to enforce this will never get enforced. They're not going to fire themselves. So this has to be an extra constitutional amendment. This has to be a new state power to say, look, you're fired, right? Get out of here. You don't get any benefits. You can't hold office again. Get out of here. You're done. Toast, right? Okay. So permanent resolutions 2, adoption. An amendment is adopted when the required number of Americans vote to adopt. The required number of Americans is 51% of the total citizens in federal elections from the previous year, rounded to 2 significant digits. All right, so anybody who votes in a federal election, doesn't matter what office, is counted. And then 51% to 2 significant digits is the number for the next year's passing of national ballot measures. Yeah. This National Referendum Act of the United States requires 71 million votes to adopt. So rather than get into the nitty gritty of how many votes were counted in 2024, we're just going to say you need 71 million votes to adopt this National Referendum Act, right? Voting. Americans, voters, deposit amendment votes in state vote banks of voting deposit. State vote banks accept votes continuously except when voting ends November 4th. The votes are tallied until noon, November 5th, right? So basically, a day and a half. And then votes are deposited once again continuously available for the next election year, right? The states shall report their tallies publicly at noon, November 5th, where totals can be added by citizens. Citizens enforce adoption by voting for the annual federal government dissolution amendment every year. Yeah, sorry. The screen did something weird. Okay, so let's get into this. Okay, why a vote bank, right? Why not just cast votes? Well, the idea here is you don't really want to be dissolving the government, right? What you want is to provide guidance, right, to our federal representatives and our Supreme Court justices and say, look, this is what we want, and we're going to give you feedback every second of every day of whether we're going to dissolve you. So, you can kind of imagine with a vote bank, and you can change your vote at any time, right? On November 4th or November 5th, when we start, there are no votes cast for next year's dissolution. And people will immediately start casting votes, right? And the minute it gets over, whatever the required number is, representatives can check that at any time and go, uh-oh, we're in trouble next year, right? And then they can start doing things. They can start communicating to the public and passing laws that would trend that number down, right? So this is a continuous feedback loop between the citizens and its representatives, right? So if the representatives, aren't doing what we want, they aren't writing laws to match the amendments that were passed, right? Then the vote count for dissolving throughout the year will start to increase because they're not doing what we want. Yeah. Okay, so let's get a little bit more into that with the next section, vote bank. States are required to have votes on deposits for its citizens. Citizens may only belong to one state vote bank where a violation nullifies the vote. Yeah. So, this is a state power. So states implement vote banks the same way a financial bank implements a financial bank, right? And as part of the extra constitutional amendment process, they also enforce those votes by making sure the representatives and the Supreme Court justices step down when they're voted out. Yeah, when the government's dissolved, right? So states' power, states' responsibility. That's what it's saying here. And citizens can only vote in one state. I mean, no surprise there, right? Votes are deposited. Votes. That's section 5. Votes are deposited, not cast. Voters are issued an ATM card. This ATM card can be used at conveniently placed voting machines to deposit votes. States will also provide websites with online vote banking, yeah, just like you do with your regular financial bank. The state vote bank will use commensurate security measures such as two-factor authentication, currently employed by U.S. banks to protect financial deposits. So with an ATM, you get both a card and then you have a pin in your head. That's two-factor. With websites, of course, you get your smartphone and your password, right? So either way, voters can authenticate securely to make sure their vote isn't compromised. Yeah. Uh, Public access. All votes and citizen amendments are made public. All vote tallies are ongoing for all votes deposited. All U.S. citizens may view any state vote count total at any time. Okay, so let's kind of explain why we're casting votes and why we're depositing votes and we're not casting them again, right? So the whole idea is you have a feedback loop, right? So, imagine every day a federal representative gets up and he checks the vote bank tallies for all the citizens, right? And the number's going up and up and up that dissolution is going to happen this year, right? That gives them an ongoing continuous feedback to say, to course correct, which is what you want, right? You want them to course correct. The idea here is you want dissolution to be rare. What we really want is, one, to give our federal representatives guidance through these amendments, right? These amendments are guidance, they're not law. And two, to hold them accountable if they don't by firing their ass through dissolution. But in between, we're going to pressure them because they're going to see the dissolution vote count go up. And they're going to know that, if it gets too high, they're probably going to get fired, right? So they have an incentive to not do, to implement what's supposed to be implemented. And if they're doing something crazy like declaring war all over the place or trying to buy Greenland, we can, express our unhappiness with this by just saying we're going to dissolve the government. Now, one of the things that's important to point out here is that you can't fire just one. You have to fire them all. And that's on design. So the check and balance here is that, let's say the president is doing something, nobody even voted on during the vote, which is to buy Greenland, right? Nobody voted on that. It wasn't a campaign thing. And we're like, no, we don't want that. So we go in and we start saying, okay, the dissolution, we're going to dissolve the government next year. And then all of a sudden the dissolution count goes up and, polling takes place. And they're saying, hey, why are you guys voting for dissolution? And they're saying, because we don't want to buy Greenland. That's not what we voted on, right? And then the president says, okay, I'm not going to buy Greenland. And then the dissolution vote goes down. And then, that's the feedback loop that you're looking for. So the whole idea is to pressure Congress, not to dissolve it as the primary thing, right? And then because they're all going to get fired, you want them to be rowing in the same boat. You want them all to say, okay, we're a team, right? And so, hey, look, if you go down, we're all going down. So, the Congress and the Supreme Court justices can say, look, man, you need to not, make overtures about buying Greenland, right? We're all going to get trashed. So that's why you don't want to just fire the president or just fire the representatives if they're not doing their job correctly, right? You want them all to be fired so that they can check each other, so that they can help each other, so they can act as a unit, as a body, which is what they're supposed to be doing, right? And not just on a party basis, right? On a holistic basis. So that's what a vote bank is. It's not, again, we're not voting on laws. So the fact that your vote is public is no big deal, right? The fact that you're unhappy with the government and you want to dissolve them should be something that's public, right? And given that there's millions of people voting, isolating any one particular person is kind of pointless. Okay, so, public deposited votes in this case are designed to be safe when they're public. Okay, so now we're going to talk, now that we've kind of gotten the idea of voting out of the way, let's talk about, okay, how are you going to write an amendment, right? So we got a couple of sections here. First is called amendments. Only 2 amendments can be adopted each year. The annual federal government dissolution amendment and 1 citizens amendment. When multiple citizen amendments receive the required number of votes, then the amendment with the highest vote count shall be the one adopted. The citizen may or may not vote for their own amendment. Okay, so recall up here under adoption that in order for an amendment to be adopted, it needs 51% of the total citizens voting in the previous year's election, rounded to two significant digits, right? Now, there's a check and balance here, right, that's built into this design, right? And that is, we have too many people not voting, right, because they're disaffected and they're disillusioned. Now, if we give them this opportunity to vote to dissolve the government through this ballot measure, or ballet measure, they may show up for that. Well, actually, they don't even have to show up. It's a continuous bank. So the state's going to give you an ATM card, and you're going to go to the bank and say, you're fired, right? I'm voting for dissolution, right? There's no one day that you're going to go and vote. It's continuous. And you have websites, too. So you can go to the website, and you can immediately change your vote. You can say, fired today. Oh, you did something. Now you course corrected. Okay, I'm going to go to the web and, remove my dissolution vote, right? So that's what this is all about, right? So what was I going with that? Amendments, only 2 amendments can be adopted each year. Oh yeah, why 2? Okay, so the reason, so one check that we have here is it's the citizens that are voting, right? The other one is the focus, right? So imagine you didn't have just one vote citizen amendment adopted. Then all your votes would be spread out across, so many amendments that you would probably never get any of them adopted, right? So what you want is, so at the beginning of the year, there are no amendments, right? November 5th, there's no amendments. So then people start adding amendments and start voting on them, and the vote counts go up, right? And then you can imagine after 6 months, 7 months, maybe even 8 months, there's no votes that are even close to getting to the number of millions of people needed, right? Well, then people can start lobbying each other, just like Congress lobbies. You can lobby each other, say, look, only one's getting adopted, and we're just going to all agree to, we're going to take our voting block and we're going to switch to this one amendment. And so by the time the year ends, enough people have said, okay, we're going to all get together and vote on this one thing. And then that will provide the momentum to get it across the vote count line. Otherwise, you're just going to have way too many people voting for way too many different amendments, and nothing will ever get passed. So this Section 7 is here to provide focus, right? You can have as many amendments suggested as you want, but only one's going to get adopted, and that's going to force citizens to, focus on what they want to adopt that year. All right. So that's what the 2 amendments are. Of course, every year we're going to vote to dissolve the government because that's our citizens' power. Citizen public amendments. State vote banks must provide the capability for citizens to deposit into the state vote bank a citizen's amendment. The citizen's amendment is to be exactly 241 characters long using American English. And you may be asking yourself, why 241? Because that's exactly how long the annual federal government dissolution amendment is. It's 241 characters. That's the only reason I picked that. Padding at the end must use an asterisk when needed. So it's always going to be 241 characters. If for some reason it's shorter than that, you will pad with asterisks at the end, not spaces, right? Further, the Citizens Amendment must have an MD5 checksum assigned at the time of deposit. Okay, so this is a computer science thing where what you do is you say, for any set of characters, I want a unique number, right? And that number is an integer, and it's called a checksum, right? And you only get that checksum out if you give as input a certain text file, right? This is what we do in computer science. So this is, you're not going to be voting on the text, you're going to be voting on the checksum, right? And then, of course, that checksum will be, we'll know which amendment that checksum was applied for, right? So this allows you to say, okay, how do I get an amendment on all 50 states? How do I get the same amendment? Well, people deposit the same check, the same text. They get the same MD5 checksum because it's always unique, right? And then 50 states have the same 50 MD5 checksums available. They can, right? And then, people vote on that same checksum, and now you can get everybody in the country voting on the same amendment, even though it's 50 different amendments in each state, but they're the same checksum, and then you get the total. So that's how it's done. So, and the same is true with citizens who, accidentally copy. You can copy somebody else's amendment as yours and vote on it, right? And the checksum will be the same, and so you're voting on the same amendment, right? Okay, so that's all MD5 checksum is. It's all you need to know is that it's a unique number that is reproducible for some text, right? If you change any character in the text, the checksum will change. Okay, so citizens may only deposit one amendment per election year. Changes and edits are not allowed. Instead, citizens should find another citizen to use their amendment for any changes. Citizens may vote for any amendment in any state vote bank. The MD5 checksum is to be used as an amendment identifier. Okay, so the states will track each other's MD5 checksums and just make them available, or the amendments available for anybody in the state, right? Or, like I said previously, citizens can just copy. You can copy within the state, you can copy across states, but, states will provide the amendment checksums for all the other states, so everybody can vote on them, yeah? So, remember, these things are deposited, right? They're not cast. So you deposit your amendment, and then you deposit your vote on a amendment, which is a checksum, right? And then throughout the year, you can change your vote at any time, right? So it will only be on, November 5th at noon, after voting closes on November 4th, that the tallies will be finalized. So citizen public identification. Each citizen shall be assigned a lifetime randomly generated 64-byte SHA. Actually, that's incorrect. I need to fix that. So what is this? Well, essentially, a 60, actually, is it 64-bit? Yeah, it should say 64-bit. But anyway, 2 to the 64 is a number that's larger than the number of atoms in the universe, meaning that you can easily assign unique numbers for all of history indefinitely for all, American citizens. So you're just going to get a unique number that'll identify you throughout history, and that's you, right? That's all this is saying, and that's how the states are going to be able to identify you if you move, right? So if you move from Florida to whatever, you're going to have this unique identifier, yeah? That's it. Federal benefits. All federally elected officials and judges are volunteers and receive only benefits as volunteer, private, in the military. Okay, so what just happened? Whiplash. Whoa, we were just talking about, voting, and now all of a sudden we're talking about federal benefits for elected officials. Okay. So remember earlier I said we don't want to dissolve the government. What we want to do is influence the government to pass laws that we want. That's what the amendment process is for, right? If we don't solve the corruption problem today, the financial incentives, then there's going to be a tension between all the money they get today currently and the dissolution, right? And what we don't want is, basically bungee representatives. People who get elected 2 years, they're corrupt, they don't care, they make themselves some money, the government gets dissolved, and then they're gone. That's not what we want. In order to prevent that kind of bungee, bounce back and forth, what you want are federal officials who aren't making money, right? So they have no financial incentive now. That means, um, you know, that removes tension from dissolving the government because it's no longer a financial opportunity for them. They're not making $175,000 a year or whatever it is they're making right now. They're only going to make the same amount of money with the same housing and stuff as a private in the military, right? And, this is also going to give a little perk to the privates in the military because, you know, of course, they're going to have to increase the conditions for, I don't know how many privates there are, but at least hundreds of thousands of them, right? So there's that benefit as well. But that's what it is, right? I mean, our representatives are, have the same financial incentive as privates in the military. That's it. If it's good enough for a private, it's good enough for you as a representative. And again, the check and balance here is that the balance is that we don't want to dissolve the government, and all the money that's in politics today will be attention, where they're like, oh, we don't care, we're just going to take the money, and then when we get fired, so what, we'll run. And then the next generation of politicians do that? No. So we're going to strip them of all their money and say, hey, you're going to make the same money as a volunteer private in the military. Yeah. Political parties. This is so the next few sections are all going to be in the same vein. Fascist political parties are permanently banned. Fascist is defined as any party that receives funding for any activity. Political parties are to be groups of people promoting similar ideas. Ideas can be shared using any number of freely available websites. So political parties have always been corrupt. They've always been, a major influence behind all of our legislation. And so what we want to do is we want to say, okay, if that's the case, we want that influence not to be directly from money. Of course, money's going to be there, right? There's nothing to prevent, even in this situation, lobbyists being paid, as employment, for example, and then spreading the ideas. There's nothing we can do about that. But at least on the face of it, at least directly, right, the political parties are banned from taking any money, right? They're going to promote their ideas through websites and through public channels, and that's how we're going to rally, right? That's how we're going to promote our ideas, right? If you join a party, you're just joining a group of people with the same ideas, right? So again, this is part of Section 10 and 11 are all about reducing the tension of corruption to, dissolve the government because they're going to come in and make some easy money and then leave. Okay, healthcare. Okay, so another whiplash here. So we just had two sections about reducing money so that we don't dissolve the government based on money. Now we have healthcare. What's this about? Well, this is basically just an amendment that we need today. And so I'm putting it in here, right? Our healthcare system is wackadoodly broken, and so I just decided, well, let's just fix it now. So this is basically just a citizen's amendment, right? That we might pass, right? So I'm not sure. This is only 241 characters long, but it's the same concept. I just put it in here. All citizens are to be provided health care for life without restrictions or requirements. A new military division, Medicine for All, shall provide the health care. Every citizen is required to volunteer for the MA for 2 years. That's the Medical for Alliance. The MA is to provide its members the essentials for living, housing, fooding, and clothing. MA essentials for living are to be considered health care, and any citizen may access them at any time, right? So this will get rid of the homeless problem. So that what the military is going to do is just like it builds facilities now for privates, it's going to build facilities for medical personnel, right? They're not going to be lavish or elaborate. They're just going to be like what you would expect if you go into a military base. Just, oh, here's a building and you're going to sleep here and whatever, right? And So that's what we're going to do, right? The military is going to provide the health care, right? Now, the military can decide whether it wants to use some combination of private doctors and enlisted doctors. That's all up on the military, right? It's their decision, right? Um, and so I think, there's a lot to be said about this, using the military as, primary care, right? First of all the citizens will have to do military duty of providing medicine for all, right? So that's a huge labor pool for them, right? Um, and then having the war machine and the healing machine working tightly together, I think, will uplift both. So it will uplift the war machine, right? So we won't be as disconnected from the military in what it's doing, because all of the MA people are in the military, right? That kind of thing. And so, we're going to set up, basically, the idea is to set up like MASH units all around the country where people can just walk in and get care. Now, if you're asking yourself, well, don't there have to be limitations on requirements, right? I mean, we can't just give everybody anything. You just have to remember that these extra constitutional amendments are guidelines. In other words, it's up to Congress to put the restrictions and requirements based on the realities of resources, right? And then it's up to the citizens to agree to that, right? They're saying, so Congress would say, look, we got a basic health care is this, and, private health care is this, right? And if the U.S. citizens agree with that, they won't dissolve the government. If they don't, they'll dissolve the government. And so it becomes a conversation, which is what you need, between the citizens and the federal government as to what without restrictions or requirements means when they actually go to craft the legislation, right? So this is just guidance. This is just saying, look, we want, as much health care that can be provided, and we're going to have conversations about what that means for cancer or experimental or anything. We're just going to continually have conversations, and if our legislatures aren't up to snuff, we'll just dissolve the government and hire new ones that will do it. Okay, so that's what this is in here for. It's going to be a military implementation. Again, there's nothing to prevent the military from coordinating with private industry, right? And the federal government can, allocate money, right? So it's just, even if the private doctors are involved, they still have to be run through the military. Yep. Okay, so that was just another whiplash. So now we're going to go back to where we were with 10 and 11. Political campaigns. Political campaigns can either take or spend money, but instead must gain popularity only by word of mouth, such as with social media. This is, again, it's the same check and balance recipe as 10 and 11. We're just trying to prevent governments being dissolved based on money's influence in politics. Propaganda. All political advertisements are permanently banned. Political material must be historical only. So again, if you're going to get elected to office, it's going to have to be by word of mouth, which you're thinking, oh, that's crazy. But no, it's not. With social media, no. I mean, come on. I think X has, 500 million users? I don't know how many of them are Americans, but I'm just saying, in this day and age, you don't need political advertisements. We can just rely on word of mouth. We have 50 million word of mouth outlets, right? So we have influencers, we have content creators, so it's not an issue. You cannot have paid political advertisements. That doesn't mean you can't talk about politicians. That's what this is saying, right? Yeah. As a person, you can go out and say, yeah, I'll vote for this. And again, you're saying, well, oh God, where are all the distinctions? And I'm like, well, we, the citizens, are just providing guidance. these extra constitutional amendments. If we think the propaganda is out of hand, then we dissolve the government. If there's propaganda going on, and we're like, okay, we want it, then we don't. It's really a these guidance amendments are a conversation between us, the people, and Congress. But you want to get rid of propaganda or political advertisements if you want to reduce the risk of dissolving the government. Bills. Every word of all bills are to be originated by elected officials only. Lobbyists are banned from providing bills. A lobbyist is anyone informing elected officials about bills being written. Okay, so this is kind of insider politics, so I'm not going to get into this too much, but since the 1990s, Congress doesn't write legislation. All of our legislation is written by big pharmaceutical companies, oil companies and stuff. And so that needs to end now, right? And the officials need to have the expertise to actually write the bills. I mean, this is the argument given, right? So if you go online and you look up why is all of our legislation written by lobbyists, the answer is always because they have the expertise. Well, they're just people. Have those people actually get elected as representatives. That's what this is about. So we need to start electing the people who can actually write the bills to the office rather than these lobbyists, right? So that's what this is about. Okay. 16, spending. Congress is banned from providing the president or other agencies with authority to allocate money and resources. All money and resources mentioned in bills passed by Congress must be allocated by Congress. All existing authorizations for allocation other than by Congress are repealed. Okay, so this is more insider baseball politics, but since FDR, Congress's number one agenda has been re-election, not governing, right? And the number one way they do this is they take something that is, a hot topic politically, like, say, abortion, and they punt. They give it to the president, all right? Or in the abortion case, the Supreme Court, right? I don't know how many Americans know this, but when, the Supreme Court passed Roe, and the Supreme Court Justice, Blackmun, I think it was hauled in front of Congress to explain themselves. He said, look, this is just a stopgap. You guys need to pass legislation about, when women go across state lines to have abortions. This is just a initial guidance, but we will honor whatever Congress wants. Well, guess what? They never passed that legislation because they're cowards, right? Because they have Congress has like a 90% re-election rate with a 10% approval rate. And the way they did that was by what's being prohibited here, is by pawning off all of their responsibility to the president. Well, who cares? President, he's out in 2 terms anyway, whatever, right? So no more, right? So I'll give you one example of this, which set me off on this back in the 80s, right? With the AIDS epidemic, is that Congress realized that, condoms as part of foreign aid packages was a political deal, right? So condoms, of course, were used to prevent the spread of AIDS, but condoms also prevent pregnancy, which Catholics and other religious people denounce, right? The Catholics officially were denouncing condoms during the AIDS epidemic, right? And then, of course, during the 80s, there was all the racism about condoms with AIDS. I said racism. I meant homophobia, right, with condoms. So what did Congress do? Congress passed a law giving the president, authorizing him the power to decide whether or not contraception, including condoms, was to be included in foreign aid to any country, right? And so by doing that, then they didn't have to worry about a reporter coming up and saying, hey, why did you vote on, giving condoms to Africa? Well, it wasn't me, it was the president, right? So that's what this spending number 16 is about, right? It's not about, the president having all the power or Congress having all the power. It's about Congress evading accountability for their bills, right? That's what they do. They pawn off all the responsibility to the president so that they get a 90% incumbency rate with a 10% approval rating. This will fix that, because now they're going to have to allocate all the money through the Congressional Budget Office and whatever. The executive office with this kind of setup is really just about diplomacy and running the military. I mean, come on. The president runs the military. That in and of itself is a full-time job. Why is he submitting budgets to Congress? Tariffs are solely, Section 17, tariffs are solely the responsibility of Congress. I won't say too much on this except to say that it was totally irresponsible of the founders to put, most of the financial responsibility on Congress and then corner off some of it for the executive branch. It makes no sense. It should all be under Congress, right? 18, executive orders. Executive orders are banned. The office of the president must execute with good faith all laws passed by Congress. Any clarifications must come from Congress, and clarifications cannot be used to inhibit implementation, but instead change future implementation. Blah. Boy. Okay. So let's get into this. Executive orders are not the president giving orders to the military. That's not what they are. Executive orders are when Congress passes a law, the president gets it and says, I don't know what this means. Well, I'm going to write an executive order to clarify what Congress passed. So in other words, Congress passed a law, parts of it are ambiguous, and he's like, I'm going to disambiguate it by writing an executive order, right? Well, that's how it started out. Now it's just like line item veto and whatever the president wants to do. And there's no check on this, right? This is why we need national ballet measures. Ballet. Because Congress doesn't hold the president accountable when his executive orders go too far. You cannot rely on the federal government to police itself. They're not doing it. They're not policing the Supreme Court. They're not policing each other. Congress isn't policing. They're not checking the president. They've clearly demonstrated that, and so that's why we need to dissolve the government. So, again, this is a provision to discourage disillusionment. So if the president is not issuing executive orders, then the responsibility for implementation of laws falls directly on Congress, which is what you want because you reelect them every 2 years. So remember, they're elected every 2 years. Dissolution is every year. So, if you're as a citizen, you can say, well, I don't like my congressman. He didn't vote the way I wanted, so I'll vote him out, right? Dissolution the barrier for dissolution should be much harder than that, right? Because it requires everybody across the country to agree to that. Okay. So this is just basically saying, the president can no longer be authorized to spend money. Congress has to do it all, right? Including on the military, right? The president is the one who gets to run the military otherwise. That's his job, right? All right. And this last one is also about preventing dissolution, corruption. Elected federal officials and judges are prohibited from increasing net worth. Elected officials and judges, the Supreme Court judges here are what, I should probably change this to and say Supreme Court judges, are banned from gaining benefit from power while in office. They are volunteers and are provided with the essentials for living as described herein. Again, if it's good enough for a private in the military to survive on, it's good enough for our representatives and our Supreme Court justices. Elected officials and judges are banned from similarly providing, directing benefit from power to others. So you can't say, oh, well, sure, I'm not making any money. Here, Wife, I'm going to give it all to you. No, that's not, man, that's what drove me crazy about Dianne Feinstein. And, she directed all this money to her husband's contracting firm. It was so annoying. The penalty for corruption is immediate firing as provided by the annual federal government dissolution amendment. Okay, so in general, we don't single out based on bad legislating firing. They're all fired or none of them, right? The only exception to that is corruption. Corruption is at the individual level. So if some politician is being corrupt, right, we can tell by their net worth going up, right, then the state can fire them individually for corruption. So this is not about them not implementing the extra constitutional amendments like we're asking. That is a done. If the amendments aren't being implemented, we as a country do that with the annual federal government dissolution amendment, right? But if the individual is corrupt, we can fire them, right? So, again, this whole point of, the representatives making no money, Supreme Court judges making no money, is not about we want them to be poor. It's about we don't want to dissolve the government because of corruption influence, right? We'll talk about a couple of other checks and balances implicit here in a second when we get done with the last section. Amendments to this act. No amendments of this act are allowed. An MD5 checksum of this document is to be used and to verify the document has not changed. Changes to the resolution in this document can be part of future citizen amendments. Okay, so really what 20 is saying is that the only way for this National Referendum Act to pass is if states implement vote banks. So the states have to implement vote banks, not all of them, just enough to get to 71 million votes, right? Once the states have vote banks, then we get to vote on this act using the MD5 checksum for this act. That's the first thing we're going to vote on. We get to 71 million, and then this act is adopted, right? That's all this is saying. In whole, right? We're not going to get back and forth into changing it because, again, we'll never get to 71 million if there's 50 million revisions coming from all directions. This has to be taken carte blanche. Any defects in it can be fixed later. Okay. So I want to talk about a couple of other checks and balances that are implicit in here and not explicit. One of them is term limits, and the other one is younger representatives or younger governments, right? So today we suffer from, people being in office way too long, and definitely, we don't have any representation of the young people being impacted by the laws that are being legislated by the generation that's about to exit, right? So this process encourages young voters because you're pegged at a net worth when you get into office and you can't increase it. You cannot increase your net worth or you're going to get fired by the state, right? That's corruption, right? Well, if you're going in at a private salary, you're probably going to be young because a private salary looks attractive to young people because that's why they go into the military. Okay, so you're going to have very young people going in as representatives, getting the private salary going, oh, this is attractive to me, right? Over time, they're going to get frustrated with the fact that they can't increase their net worth, and they're going to leave. So this addresses two things. One, it's going to encourage younger voters because the salary is very low, right? And two, it's going to do term limits because as they want to increase their net worth, they're going to go, I don't want to do this anymore, and they're going to leave. And the same logic applies to the Supreme Court justices, right? So, this again is a check and balance, if you will, on dissolution. So, a lot of this ballot measure document is focused on not dissolving right? Getting rid of the corruption, getting rid of executive orders, getting rid of Congress pawning off responsibilities to the president is about ensuring we don't dissolve the government because they're focused on passing legislation. So they're the ones writing the bills, right? Congress is allocating the money, as the bills say. The president has to go to Congress and ask for clarification. He can't willy-nilly it through executive orders, right? And so on, right? And then, except for corruption, we have to fire them all. And there's this ongoing feedback loop with the deposited votes. They're not cast, they're deposited, right? And so every American and the representatives can check every day to see, how close are we to dissolving the government, right? And then if they see it starting to go up, they now have action. They can do a course correction, right? They can pass a law to course correct, right? And so on, right? So this is a approach. This is something we can try. It doesn't have to be this one document, of course. We can, there's no amendments to this once we start voting on it, but we aren't there yet. We're gonna, it's gonna take time for states to enact vote banks and stuff. So the actual National Referendum Act that makes it into the machines that you're going to vote on could very well change. So Amendment 20 or Section 20 there only applies to once the amendment is being established within the vote banks, right? So once that MD5 checksum is plugged into your state's vote bank, it cannot be changed, right? And then, of course, the first state to do it, to have that, will influence all the other states because you have to get to 71 million. So, there can be a, let's call it constitutional convention, extra constitutional convention among the states to say, okay, we're going to align on the Referendum Act and we're all going to agree on it, and then that's the MD5 checksum we're going to put in our vote banks, and then that's what we vote on. So anyway, this is a stopgap. There's no way to prevent our government from collapsing. It's going to collapse. This is just these national ballet measures are just a way to slow it down, right? There's just too much corruption. They'll find ways to bribe politicians and stuff, even though their net worth can't go up, even though they're prevented, right? And you have to understand that the only power here, the only new power, is the state governments can fire, federal elected politicians and Supreme Court justices. They can remove them from office, right? Will they? If so, the efficacy, the ability for this to work is really, not just a conversation between citizens and the federal government, but citizens and the state governments to enforce it, right? So, and that can be done with state elections. If a governor is saying, we're not going to remove anybody, then just vote for a different governor, right? So, governing is messy. This is going to be messy, but it's a process, I think, that has a chance to work. It's got lots of checks and balances built into it, like only one, referendum per year besides dissolving the government, right? And so on. So Congress doesn't have to worry about, an onslaught of amendments. They only have to worry about one every year, right? And then, just because they get, you must implement health care, it might take a few years to implement it. But as long as people see they're actually moving in the right direction, they're not going to get replaced. They're not going to get fired, right? So again, these referendums are suggestions, right? And they're enforced by either firing them all, right? Or in the case of corrupt politicians, we can remove or fire just the one, right? All right. Well, that's it. hope you enjoyed this. I did, and yeah, let's get a round of applause going here. Where is the applause guy? Oh, there he is. Ah, very good. All right. Well, again, content creators, feel free to, have at it. Thank you. Bye.